Now, I want to go to another story here because there's been some very interesting reporting in recent weeks connected to the Iran issue and the United Nations and the end of the arms embargo. And the Jerusalem Post have covered this. Benjamin, of course, one of their senior correspondents who specializes particularly in reporting relating to Iran and their proxy, Hezbollah. Can you give us a little bit of an overview on the way things stand now since things have changed with regard to the UN, Benjamin?
Well, the UN weapons embargo on the Islamic Republic of Iran expired this month, and much to the disappointment, I would say acute disappointment of the Israeli government and the US, allies such as France, Germany, and Britain opted not to oppose the extension of the weapons embargo against Iran. That would allow Iran now to buy weapons from China and Russia to be used in their proxy wars against Syrian civilians, civilians in Yemen, and of course, Israel. So the situation, in my view, is a giant farce, and Chancellor Angela Merkel, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and French President Emmanuel Macron have contributed to unfortunately destabilizing the Middle East and jeopardizing Israel's security. There's no other way to put it, and it's particularly, I think, an enormously disappointing response from Merkel, who has pledged back in 2008 that in the Knesset that Israel's security, open quote, is non-negotiable, close quote, for her administration. So we're at a situation that's highly dangerous for Israel. The United States has said, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the United States will sanction any entities and persons involved in selling weapons to Iran. So that's a good response. The problem, again, is Europe's utterly soggy appeasement toward Iran's regime.
And Peter, what's your take on this? Obviously, with your time in the military and speaking on these matters for so many years, how concerned are you?
I would divide it up into perhaps three separate issues. First of all, the fact that the world leaders can't seem to get this priority right is actually a reflection on the state of internationalism, where people can't seem to, trying to fight the coronavirus, trying to fight radical Iran. If you can't seem to get the priorities right, things are always going to fall through the gaps. And that gap leads to perhaps the second issue, the state of Iran. Now, Iran, over the years and before the embargo was placed, had the ability to buy advanced weaponry, but they were lacking in funds on one hand, or they were lacking on the other hand with a partner to buy from. So even when they wanted to buy advanced aerial defense capabilities, the S-300, the Russian S-300, it took them something like 14 years to be able to receive those munitions. 4 years ago, they asked for the S-400, and they still haven't received a response from the Russians. So the Russians have their own interests playing on who they want to sell. We're no longer in the situation of the 90s when Russia was handing out arms to be favored by regional players around the world. Now they need the money, so if you can't pay for it, you aren't getting it. And the third level, obviously, would permeate down to the level of what it actually means for Israel. And this could actually mean if they're able to get advanced weaponry and that they pass them on to their regional proxies, like in Syria with Assad's regime or Hezbollah, then we could see an uptick in IDF activity to counter those measures before they're positioned or en route, as we've seen and has been reported extensively over recent years. So I think on those three levels, it's a poor reflection of the state of the world generally, where you need to highlight the bad actors of the world, those that take advantage and abuse and are hostile, definitely in a region like the Middle East.
And to both of you, hearing what you say about all these issues, how much does the Trump factor come into these reactions from other member states of the United Nations, President Trump very unpopular with many European and other leaders. Do you think many of them are doing this, as we say in Hebrew, dafka, just to kind of make a point about Trump as much and his policies in the region? Benjamin?
I mean, I've heard some chatter that the Europeans, use Trump as a pretext to not extend the UN weapons embargo and invoke the snapback sanctions against Iran because of Iran's violation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal. I find that excuse to be just a bogus excuse. I think the Europeans are deeply wedded to the Iran deal because they're largely interested in business deals with Iran. It's a continuation of over 40 years of accommodating a regime that's according to the State Department under the Obama, the Democratic administration, and the Trump administration, the world's worst state sponsor of terrorism. So the Europeans, and Germany's probably the best example, it's the fifth largest trading partner of Iran, according to the new EU statistics this year. Over 1 billion euros in trade took place from Germany with Iran. So again, I see that as just utter nonsense because the Europeans feel that this deal is the be-all and end-all of all non-proliferation deals. And it's actually the world's worst anti-proliferation deal because it allows Iran, within a certain period of time, to build a nuclear weapons device.
And Peter, just to wrap this particular section up, from your time when you were previously involved with the Israeli military, when you were working in that role and the Israeli military was looking at what was going on with Iran, how much did they feel that the United Nations was being a fair broker and that Israel was getting a fair hearing on this particular subject?
I think that it's been a long time since the Israeli establishment put too much weight on the UN as a fair broker. Whether it's been on peacekeeping forces on our borders or activities that have gone into trying to seek and find out the proliferation of nuclear weapons within Iran. These types of things, I don't think Israel has never been dependent on outside forces to try and judge. Definitely not in a position of fairness. And I think the UN body as a whole is institutionally set up by sheer numbers to undermine and I would say sidestep and put Israel in a position where we have very little room to maneuver, and therefore the emphasis is always going to be on our own abilities to identify the needs, our own ability to understand the intelligence of what's happening in Iran or what's happening on our borders. And I think that translating that into action and action items is always going to be prioritized over the international community.